clean up as you go, especially if you have housemates or you have your family. They're going to be really happy with you if you don't leave a mess or you're not using the bathtub and 5 hours later the carboy is still sitting there. Hello, my name is Rhea Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. Hip, hip, hooray! That was myself bringing you into this here episode 382, talking about using the bathtub for cleaning cider equipment. And I know if you're out there in Ciderville and you've been making cider for whatever amount of time, there's probably one time or another that you have used your bathtub to clean something, whether it's a big old bucket or some carboys. You know, until you get your system set up, bathtubs work really well, but you don't want to leave your mess there. And that's part of the topic that we're going to be talking about this week on this here episode. A clean, sanitized cider setup will then lead to the opportunity to make a clean, healthy cider that you could drink and share. And this is just part of a little mini series I'm doing this time of year in the fall when everybody is thinking about cider making. And there's many folks out there who listen to Cider Chat who are very adept at making cider and know it like the back of our hand. Talking about it and sharing some of that knowledge is key to bringing other folks onto the cider making trail and getting an understanding what is happening to get from apple to bottle or apple to glass, if you will. So that's a little bit about what I'm talking about. Last week in episode 381, I was talking about the basics of cider making. And so you could check out that episode, maybe if you'd like to kind of catch up here. It doesn't matter. Either way, you could go back and forth. These are short little episodes to give you that push, that encouragement, and try your hand at it, because that will super, super duper inform you in ways that you won't even imagine. I mean, one of the things I love to do when I'm leading a Totally Cider tour, and in case you don't know what that is I have led tours both internationally and nationally. And yes, to the folks who have been asking me about upcoming tours in 2024, I already have set up part of the itinerary for the French cider tour that will be coming up. Once again, it's going to be fantastic. And if you want to come along on that tour, now is a good time to start sending an email this way to say, put me on that list, and give me a sense of how many people we're talking about, because people are already doing that for 2024. There's a lot of excitement. Folks saw what we did last year on the French cider tour to both Normandy and Brittany, which is exactly what I'm looking at doing again, with a couple changes to kind of keep on spicing it up. There's just so many producers to visit, and I want to share this amazing landscape that I've had the privilege to go to for so many years now, and meet the makers there in person, drink on site. There's nothing better than that. And also to see their cider making practices and understand it, because everybody is just a little different. You know, it's like what your kitchen looks like will probably look really different than mine, right? We all have different setups. Like, for instance, in my kitchen, because things have kind of like gotten built on during the years and additions to the house and stuff, there is a window in the kitchen that doesn't really look out to anything except like the other room now. So we built in a giant spice rack in the kitchen. I mean, it's huge and it's fantastic. That may not be your scene in your kitchen. Maybe you have everything all closed up, but I live in a funky house. What can I say? I also have this like little pegboard, kind of following Julia Childs, who was a very famous chef. Maybe you saw her different TV specials. Just love Julia Childs. And she had a home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I hail from Massachusetts now. And in that Cambridge home that Julia had set up for her kitchen, she had pegboards for all her pots and pans. And so I have a little mini pegboard in my kitchen. Now, again, that may not be your style, but that's how a chef works in their kitchen, and you got to find your own way. So I'm hoping that this little series here will provide that insight to give you encouragement, give you a sense of what you need to look at, and then find your own way through all this information. That's the featured presentation on this here episode 382 at ciderchat.com or wherever you find your podcast episodes. Really happy to have you along on this ride today. And next up, we're going to go and we're going to hear a little bit about our sponsors, starting with the Northwest Cider Association. They're doing a spotlight on Idaho cideries and the agricultural scene there. It's been a really great opportunity for myself, someone who has passed through Idaho but hasn't really hung out in the cideries, to also know what's happening. So we have a featured cidery and a little bit more.
In southwest Idaho, you will find the town of Beole, which is called the trout capital of the world. The region is known as the Snake River Valley, and it is here that you will find the cidery known as Cedar Draw.
Now, before we go any further, let's get something straight. The town name is spelled B-U-H-L, and it is pronounced as Beule, which rhymes with cool. And trust us, there's nothing cooler than the refreshing taste of a Cedar Draw cider.
Emily and John Mason started Cedar Draw Cider in 2018. Emily is the cider maker and John manages the tasting room. Cider Draw makes farm-to-table hard cider with locally harvested fruit.
At Cedar Draw, there's a drink for every kind of cider enthusiast. But it's not just about the drink. It's about an experience. It's about connecting with the roots, understanding the land, and celebrating the art of cider making. It's about the stories each bottle holds and the traditions they honor.
Make plans today to discover Idaho. Make a stop at Beole. Enjoy the scenery. Take up trout fishing and let Cider Draw introduce you to the authentic taste of Idaho cider.
And remember, it's Beule as in cool. There's nothing cooler than raising a glass of Cedar Draw's finest, surrounded by the breathtaking vistas of Beule, Idaho.
Find out more about Cedar Draw and other Idaho cider makers by going to the Northwest Cider Association website, nwcider.com.
And because the world is round and there's a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere, people are making cider all year round, which means it's never too early to start thinking about which cider yeast you would like to use to create a specific profile for your glass. Next up, let's hear a little bit about one of the 4 staff cider yeasts from Fermentis, who helped sponsor this here episode. Sweet, crisp, fresh, or balanced, whatever the cider you want to make, you will find the right yeast for your favorite cider in the Staff Cider range by Fermentis. This week, let's discover Staff Cider AC4. AC4 stands for Apple Crisp. This yeast is ideal to produce fresh and crisp cider. It ensures a very good assimilation of fructose and is excellent for low-gravity ciders. The results are an intensely fresh aromatic profile, meaning apple and floral, with a crisp mouthfeel, enhancing cider structure. Staff Cider AC4 is the perfect fit for highly fresh and crisp, sweet, and dry ciders. Want to explore diversity of cider profiles? Discover it all through the selection of yeast strains by visiting their website, fermentis.com.
Walking through the orchard.
And I have one more tidbit of news coming in from the Pacific Northwest. If you are in the Seattle region, this coming Sunday, October 15th, and you want to be at the Watershed Pub in Northgate, there'll be a special tasting flight with ciders, of course. And this is being put on by Press Then Press. That's Eric and Story's sister helping too in office. Really family scene, making it possible for folks really pretty much in the U.S., but maybe further afield too. I'm not quite sure about that. I should find out. But I do know in the U.S., they will ship cider to you. They have both nationally made ciders from the U.S., but also international ciders. So let's look at the little list that they're going to have in their special release for their quarter club box coming up. They have Oliver's Fine Cider and Perry. We love Tom Oliver, and that's going to be a Kiev cider. They have a cider from Eric Bordelais, a sparkling brut cider. And, I want to just say this. I've been finding Eric's ciders to be a little bit on the sweet side, kind of changing the profile. That's just my thoughts. Love to hear how this brut is. I do love the Cedar Argelette. That is my most favorite cider of his. I even find his Poiré sweeter than most of the Donfronte cider makers in that region. Just my 2 cents, just saying that, things do change. Also, a cider from Empirical Orchards and Cidery in Washington, and Snowdrift Cider out in more like the mid part of Washington State. And then from the Northeast, Fable Farm Fermentory. I just had Chris and John on the podcast if you want to hear all about it. And this is going to be a barrel-aged blend of over 100 cider apple varieties from Fable Farm Fermentory. We actually talk about that cider, so do check out that episode. I will put a link in the show notes, or just Google Fable Farm Cider Chat, and you'll get to hear that episode. Press and Press this coming Sunday, October 15th, which is another reason to always listen to Cider Chat as soon as it comes out, because I do try to put out weekly news that keeps us in sync with cider news going on worldwide. As always, tip of the glass to Press and Press. They are a patron of Cider Chat, and you too can become a patron by joining the Cider Chat Patreon page. There's different tiers for different membership levels, and it gets you into, some special releases I put out there, and mainly it's just a great way to support this podcast, which is listener supported. So thank you to Press and Press, as always, and to all the commercial cider makers, non-commercial makers, and cider enthusiasts that are helping to keep this podcast on the air and keep on rolling out wonderful episodes, at least in my mind, because some of you listening may have been on it already each and every week. All right, up next is our feature presentation on keeping your cider equipment sparkling clean. Each year around this time, I start getting questions about making cider. And it's typically from beginner cider makers who really have no idea where to start. A general sense, but even if you have a list of equipment, it can be overwhelming. I remember it so well myself, that initial batch of cider fermenting. How does it work? And, once you get the juice, the fresh pressed apple juice, from the cider mill, do you just pour it into the container? How do you deal with the airlock? So last week's episode, I gave a list of equipment needs that you would have to have on hand to make at least, at the minimum, a 1-gallon batch of cider. You might start with 1 gallon of apple juice, and then once all is said and done, it's going to be a little less than a gallon of cider, but it's going to get you started and give you a sense whether this is something that you want to go further into. And I want to really encourage everyone out there in Ciderville to try your hand at making cider. It actually surprises me how many people who talk about cider have never made cider. So if that's you, if you're out there and you're somebody who enjoys talking about it, maybe you're a social media influencer at some level in Ciderville, try making some cider. Try making a 1-gallon batch. It will just really, it'll fill your cup. That's one place to start. But it'll also give you a sense of what's involved, give you a deeper appreciation for what the commercial makers have to do. And it will also fine-tune your palate. You get a sense of when a batch goes well and when it doesn't go well. What's the difference there? What is the taste profiles? So last week, episode 381 was the basics. So you could check that out. Links in the show notes. Just Google Cider Chat 381 and it should come up. This week, I want to kind of take a couple steps back and talk about cleaning the equipment, getting it ready for the actual fermentation. Because this is what happens. Folks get their little vessel, might be a plastic container of juice, and that's already from the cider mill. You're good to go. You don't need to do any cleaning of that vessel. Just keep it in that plastic jug for the short term. But a lot of folks might go, I want to get a glass jug. And now you have the juice, you're looking at the jug and you're thinking, do I need to clean it? And what do I use to clean it? Do I use bleach? Can I just use soap and water? Or can I heat up water to a boiling point and pour it all over? There's lots of different options out there, some a little bit better for the environment than others. Without getting too deep in it, I would like to provide an overview to get you started, to feel like you could tangle with this art of cider making and not feel super overwhelmed. So that's the goal, and we're going to begin with tip number 1, which is understanding the importance of sanitation. And let's not even look at the vessels that you're going to be using. It's a glass jar, plastic, whatever. Let's look at the apples. Let's say you're pressing apples on your own cider press. Definitely wash your cider press beforehand. I do not use bleach on my wooden cider press. I just don't. And I'm going to be talking about the solution that I actually use to clean my different products, but that's a little bit further along. But you want to clean your cider press. If it has like cobwebs and all that, just bring it down with a water hose. You might have to bring out the scrubby and kind of scrub it down a little bit, clean it up. It's going to go a long way to having a cider that doesn't have a lot of little microbes. The other piece is clean your apples. Wash your apples. I have tasted cider that was made with a lot of love and care, and the end result came out when people don't wash their apples. It tastes like a muddy cider. I mean, you're setting up an environment where these like little microbes can hang out because it's a perfect medium for growing in and take over. And that will change the entire taste profile. So sanitation is super, super important. It's such a bummer when somebody has picked all those apples and spent all that time making it, and it could have been great had they just taken the time to wash the dirt off or cut out some of the really gnarly little apples that, have a big old bruise and bunch of other stuff going on one side. You have to decipher through that. I know sometimes there is a minimalist type of mentality in the cider community and kind of squeaking every little nickel and dime. And I don't know. I don't think that's really getting anybody anywhere in this case, especially when you're talking about a consumable. So get food grade quality products and wash your apples, wash your equipment. The yeast that's in there will thrive, but there's also harmful microbes, and they will multiply, and they'll totally spoil your entire batch of cider. And what I mean by spoiling cider, you might wonder what that tastes like. I said muddy, but there's also undesirable bacteria and a wild yeast that can get a foothold that could really change it up in a way that is going to give you off flavors. And those off flavors can range from being really medicinal, right? That's not scrumptious. I don't want to be drinking that. Or it can have like a Band-Aid taste. And that's literal. I know nobody is probably out there chomping down on Band-Aids. All you need to do is kind of unwrap a Band-Aid, those little sticker ones you put on your arm for a cut or something, a little nick. And there's like a smell, kind of a packagey, plasticky smell. It has pretty distinct smell, Band-Aid. It's kind of funny. That could come out through a taste. And there's also like a buttery flavor. Now, sometimes people think buttery, that sounds delicious. And that's like diacetyl. And it's not, unless you really are going that route and trying to create something, it's not typically a favorable taste profile. It can be really overwhelming. And another off flavor can be like a vinegar-like sourness from acetobacter. And none of these are flavors that you want in your carefully crafted cider. So be careful. And then there are times, and I will confess to this, where I've made something and I'm like, I do not want to pour it out. That's like 5 gallons in that big old carboy that I have, and it'll get better over time. And some ciders do, when you're dealing with a clean property. The liquid has this cleanliness all the way. You've been really sanitary and your different instruments you're using. But there's times where it can go over the top, and when you drink it, it could get your stomach upset, and you don't want that. Not a good thing to do. So be careful. Tip number 1, understand the importance of sanitation, and that will start you down a path of really checking your records and making sure that you did the right thing. Like, you wouldn't go into the sink and pull out a dirty dish and put your exquisite meal that you've been cooking for hours and hours on a dirty dish. You don't want to do the same thing with your apples or your juice. You don't want to pour it into a jug that's dirty. All right, let's go on to tip number 2, which is cleaning versus sanitizing. We want to know the difference. To keep those unwanted microbes at bay that produce off flavors, we both need to clean and sanitize. And while those two words might sound similar, they actually serve separate purposes in the process. Cleaning, in short, it just removes the visible dirt and residue. So that's like with the cider mill. If it is, sitting there all year in the barn, and I don't know, there's, bats flying around upstairs in the old barn or in your back shed, mice running around, or, these things that happen. I don't know. It happens in my yard, maybe not you. You got to clean it. You got to take care, get rid of the dust, the visual that you see that says, hey, this is dirty. Same thing with the jug or any other tools that you're using. Maybe a friend gave you a used glass jug and you're looking at it and you're seeing a little crud around the surface or inside, some browning. Clear glass should be clear and kind of sparkling. That's where you want to get it to when you are cleaning. Sanitizing is just a wee bit different. It goes a step further, and it's eliminating or reducing those unseen and harmful microbes. So where cleaning is taking care of the visible, sanitizing is really working with the invisible elements that we don't know are there because we can't see it. So we want to take 2 steps. Clean it, make it shiny, and sanitize to take care of the invisible microbes. And if you don't, they'll really jeopardize your cider. Believe me, I've been there. I don't want you to go through this. And a little side note here, it's amazing on how I do all these steps and I don't think about it. And then trying to explain it, there's a million little tips I could give you. So I'm trying to hone it back. And I'm sure there's cider makers out there saying, Rhea, you should have added this or you should have added that. And I'm just thinking this is a really great competition. Who can explain cider making super clearly without overwhelming the listener? I'm always trying to hone the skill. Let me know how I'm doing. I would love to hear because I want to keep it simple. Because in the end, it is a simple process. You kind of pick and choose. Does my cider press, shine? Is it spotless? No, it's like an 1880 cider press. It's wood. There's, definitely microbes in the wood. I kind of am considering that those are good. And how I sanitize it takes care of the ones that I don't want. But, there's only so much I can do, right? Now I'm kind of going back and forth, but I don't want to confuse you. It's not that hard. It really isn't. So tip number 1 was the importance of sanitation. Tip number 2 is cleaning versus sanitizing. Now we know the difference. One is dealing with the visible versus the invisible with sanitizing. And now we're going to go to tip number 3, choosing the right sanitizer. If you're listening to this episode, you probably have already been searching on the web for different products in terms of sanitizers, and you might be feeling a little overwhelmed. I know you could get there. I mean, I sometimes feel like I can't keep up on it. And I have definitely had one tried and true product that I've used since the beginning, since I've started fermenting, which has been quite a while. And this used to be pretty popular, but I don't see folks using it so much anymore. But I've always had luck with it. I like it because it's really easy on the pocket, and it goes a long way. I'll have one bottle last me years. And, I have in the past been making a lot of stuff. So let's just talk about the product, and then we'll just talk about how you use it. That's in the next tip. This is called Ida4, product number 1. And the other one is called Star San. Both are effective, but they cater to different preferences. Personally, like I said, I do lean towards Ida4 for cleaning my different products, like my glass carboys. And in your case, perhaps it might be a 1-gallon glass jug. It's an iodine-based sanitizer, so it kind of looks like the color of iodine. And you don't get any kind of off taste from it. You have to use it at the correct concentration. It doesn't leave any taste or residue on your equipment, so it won't leave any staining. So that's a really big advantage. And I will talk about in the next tip a little bit how to use it. But because it's iodine, one of the disadvantages is it can cause some staining. So you don't want to get it on your clothing or, depends on where you're working to make your cider. You want to be careful with that product. It can leave marks on plastic if it's left too long or you kind of messed up the concentration. So first sanitizer I want to talk about is Ida4. The second one I use is called Star San. And this is an acid base. It's known for its foaming action. They both actually foam, but Star San in particular, it has foaming action, and that's useful because it, kind of gets into like the little nooks and crannies that you may have missed otherwise. And some fermenters kind of like swear by the phrase, don't fear the foam, because even if some foam is left behind, it won't harm your cider. So tip number 3 is choosing the right sanitizer. These are the two I use, Ida4 or Star San. Again, I'll have links in the show notes for either of these products and where you could get them. Coming up with tip number 4 is make sure that you use your sanitizers correctly. Both Ida4 and Star San need to be diluted. Now with Ida4, typically, it's a concentration of 12.5 parts per million, or roughly 1 teaspoon per 1.5 gallons of water. That's what's recommended. So for me, I am kind of like that, home style maker of where I don't always measure. I'm going to truly confess that. I have this old Ida4 bottle that I kind of squeeze it up and I could see the measurement on the bottle. It kind of goes into its own little measuring cup, and I use that. And I see I have just, a small amount. I pour that into my glass jar, and then I have a little funnel that I put on top of my glass jug. I'm not really using 1 gallons. I'm using larger volume, like 3-gallon or 5-gallon carboys. And I pour the water in. I pour probably around a half gallon, because a gallon is about 7 pounds of weight. You couple that with the weight of the glass carboy, it starts getting heavy for this person here, me. So I'm really careful about that. So I eyeball it because I've been doing it for so long. I'm looking for a color. When you dilute it, it's still looking a little rusty because it's iodine in the water. And you could tell that the solution looks right. I could tell because I've been doing it for a long time. If you haven't, follow the directions. Follow the directions. Always follow the directions. Don't listen to me. I'm not the scientist here, just a podcaster. Then, once you have poured the Ida4 into the water, you need to have contact on the surface. They say 1 minute. I normally kind of do like maybe 2 minutes. It's rough. Again, because the way you get contact is you have to swish that thing around. And so there's Rhea swishing around a 5-gallon carboy. And that for 2 minutes, that's a lot of swishing. It really is. Like, that's not easy to do. I actually cap my hand over the opening, and I just shake that thing. Got to crank up the tunes and just kind of shake it around, dance with the carboy. It's a new song coming out, 2024. And you're getting a lot of contact there. And once you're done, what I like to do is I actually will reuse some of that solution. True confession, it seems to work with me. If I'm working with multiple vessels and cleaning it, and I'll, maybe clean one more carboy to get a little bit of a length in that solution. So I'll get the funnel off, put another carboy, pour it in there. And then I flip the carboy upside down, the glass jug, and let it drain out. And I have a stand for air drying. And I'm going to have 2 links in the show notes for stands that you could purchase for drying your carboy. This is kind of a critical piece of equipment that you need in cider making because you want it to dry out. You don't rinse after you have poured your sanitizer in there. You don't go to the tap and say, oh, look at all that foam there. I'm now going to rinse it out with some tap water. Because tap water, despite the fact that it might be potable and perfectly fine for human consumption, hopefully where you live that's true, there can still be little microbes in there that can lead your cider astray. So if you're sanitizing it, all you need to do is use a solution such as Ida4 or Star San to do that cleaning. Star San's kind of the same thing. With Star San, the usual dilution is about, I think it's about 1 ounce to 5 gallons. Check it on the bottle. Make sure you're up to date with the most current. So it's a little bit more, and the contact time is about the same, 2 minutes. So you are pouring that water in. You pour a little Star San. Funnels are really great to have around. They have a whole bunch of funnels online. I will make a note to put a link in the show notes for that. Makes it so easy to pour solutions in without spilling it. And again, you shake it around, gets in all the nooks and crannies, and then you flip it upside down and kind of let it all drip out. You'll see the foam coming out. That's the way to correctly use your sanitizer. Up next is tip number 5, which is clean as you go. Now that might sound kind of like obvious. Of course I'm going to clean as I go. I don't leave a mess behind. But things happen. If you've been shaking that carboy for 2 minutes and you have a couple of them that you've been shaking, you're a little tired. Maybe it's cold out. You've been processing a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of apples or whatever to get ready for the juice or get the juice ready for, the yeast. However you're doing it, it could be exhausting. And you might put it back and go have a snack or something and stuff starts sitting. And one of the dangerous things about cider, even fresh pressed apple juice, is you don't want to leave it on a concrete floor. The acid in the cider, which will not hurt if you're drinking it, right? But on the floor, it will start eating it away. And so be really careful about that. Clean up as you go, especially if you have housemates or you have your family. They're going to be really happy with you if you don't leave a mess or you're not using the bathtub and 5 hours later the carboy is still sitting there upside down drying. You want to take care of it. And that's when accidents happen. A little push and dog comes in or the cat jumps onto the bathtub or whatever. If you're using the bathtub, for instance, all of a sudden that glass jug could go flying. You don't want that. So really basic tip, but a good reminder for all of us to pick up after ourselves. A little bit of time is going to save you in the long run. Another way to look at this is, let's say now you want to start saving bottles to then package your cider once it's ready. It's fully fermented and now you want to bottle it. So as you're collecting bottles or friends are giving you bottles, you want to clean them. As soon as you don't want to bring like stinky bottles to the recycling center either, or cans. As soon as you're done drinking, rinse it out and get a little bottle brush in there and clean it. So when it actually comes time to bottling, boy, it's just going to be a game changer, an absolute game changer. All right, so that's 5 tips for beginners for cleaning and sanitizing your equipment so that you will be led down the path of heavenly cider without off flavors, right? That's the ultimate goal. I have a little bit of catching up from last week's episode. I just want to kind of fill in a couple pieces there. So let me come to that next. In the show notes for episode 381, which was the basics of cider making for like a 1-gallon batch, I had equipment lists of a jug, a little stopper for that jug that has a drilled hole where you could stick an airlock in it. I failed to talk about the airlock. What do you put in that airlock? How does it work? The airlock is there so it could release the CO2 as the cider starts fermenting, and that's where the yeast is eating the sugar, converting it into alcohol. it's releasing CO2. But you don't want oxygen in. That's why you don't have an open covered vat just allowing it to ferment. You use the airlock, and it bubbles out of the airlock because it's bubbling through water. You put water in that airlock, and you'll see a little line mark on the airlock. And so you go halfway, so it's kind of an even amount. You don't fill it up to the brim. I also use vodka in my airlock, especially if it's going to be in there for a long time because water can evaporate. And also it keeps it sanitary in a way where, again, going back to those microbes we were talking about, sometimes, different pressures can go on, and I don't want any kind of that water. It might tip back into the vessel. So I'll use a little bit of vodka. I have a dedicated and a cheap vodka, anything will do like that I pour in my airlock. The other thing is it doesn't freeze. And I have put different vessels in some pretty cold situations. And not that it should freeze, because you don't want to go that cold. 32 degrees is really stinking cold. But yeah, so water or an alcohol would do, again, to save on the budget, just use water. Maybe a good thing to do, if you can, use some water that you boiled, let it cool, pour that in there, or some distilled water would work too, I believe. So that's what goes in the airlock. It allows the surface of the cider to be as oxygen-free as possible, and allows the CO2 to release through it. I forgot to say that. See, as I said, there are so many little details that when you're making cider, you don't really think twice about it. You just go for it. But I know that you out there in Ciderville, this might be your first time ever doing it. So know that not everything's going to be perfect. And maybe that's kind of one of those like small little blessings in life that you gotta let go and have a little spontaneity. Don't be afraid of putting a call out on social media saying, hey, I did this, what next? There's a lot of folks out there in Ciderville who are willing to answer those kinds of questions. Different Facebook groups specific for cider making that are really great to help you, probably give you more info than you ever need. And trust your intuition, your gut feeling. If you are a cook at any kind of level, if you have a home where you have a kitchen and you know the basics of keeping things clean when you're working with chicken or different fruits or vegetables in your refrigerator, use those same principles. You have that baseline there. I mean, who knows? In another year or so, or even less, you might contact me and say, hey, Rhea, I heard this episode, and guess what? I'm now opening a cidery. And you know what? In my mind, we can never have enough cider makers. We want more. We want more. We want to keep on passing that tradition along to others. Oh, well, I hope I didn't miss anything. Well, probably did, but that's okay. We got the baseline there. If you have some thoughts about this or some questions about cider making, do send it this way. Send a little email to info@ciderchat. And with that, I leave you here. This is Rhea Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville. There is a reason why we do it like this.
There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we drink it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Yeehaw!